Hey everyone, today we're going to go over every single question type that can possibly be on your SAT exam. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because we will be also covering SAT grammar. Everything that could be on your SAT will be in this video. All of these question types, everything the College Board puts on its official website is in this video, so make sure you stick it through. And good luck. We're going to start off with textual evidence. Okay, we are getting started with our first topic here, textual evidence, likely the biggest one you'll see on your SAT. Almost all four of these example question types you will see on test day. So what they're going to ask you is some variation of which choice is either going to best or worst support the conclusion, right? Which choice is better, which choice might weaken that conclusion, which finding might support a conclusion, which quotation might support a conclusion. These words, conclusion, hypothesis, argument, claim, they all mean the same thing. They will be used interchangeably on test day. We've got a pretty simple three-step plan here. Okay, the first step is you got to identify their argument. This whole question is going to center on what the conclusion is, what the hypothesis is, what the claim is, right? If you can't identify that, you're not going to know how to answer the question. This is the most important step. What you're going to do then, you're going to read the answers, and you're going to read the supporting information. In other words, every part of the paragraph, every part of your passage, that's not the argument. Okay. Then you'll eliminate choices that either go against your argument or that don't make sense with the supporting info. You might have a choice that sure argues the same thing, but it uses completely different evidence to argue that thing, and that's going to be an incorrect choice. Let's take a look at this example question. In a research paper, a student argues that the Soviet Union's victory in the Battle of Stalingrad, right, we're going to have a little bit of a non-essential phrase here, which is something we're going to get to in boundaries, was more symbolically important than it was strategically important. So his argument, if I could characterize that argument in just two words, all right, symbolically, right, symbolically, not strategically, right, three words there, symbolically, not strategically, okay? So, which of these quotes is going to effectively illustrate this claim? Let's see, let's take a look at this. Does this really think about symbolically? No, this is describing how the war was fought here. This is describing the Battle of Stalingrad itself. So this is not the correct answer. Let's take a look at the next one. Most scholars debate what would have occurred with the German forces attacked a more advantageous location. That's not related to this at all. This is not the answer, okay? After suffering humiliating losses west of Stalingrad, the Red Army's generals knew that Stalingrad would be the target of a major... Nope, I can already see here we're not talking about, how important it was strategically, symbolically, whatnot. Now, a defeat at Stalingrad, which bore the name of revered Soviet leader, revered means that it's probably important. This is a symbol, right? Would have yielded some important territory, but would not have significantly stunted the war effort, which means it was not strategically important. There's our claim here. Crucially, though, it would have crushed the Soviet spirit if this had not happened, right? Again, symbolically here. So we see our answer is D. And now we're going to move on. Okay, this is our last question here for textual evidence. All right, topic 2, quantitative evidence. So quantitative evidence is slightly different from textual evidence in that you'll be given some sort of graph or table. It's kind of the same idea, though. Okay, it's the same choices, it's the same idea, the same question as textual evidence, and pretty much it's the same strategy. But we're going to introduce a third step here. Our third step is to analyze and to read the graph or table given. But first, we read the answers and the supporting info. Okay? Often, what you'll only need from the passage is the last sentence. Okay? In this case, we have a different type of question, right? This is a more difficult question, but often you only need to know the last sentence for the argument. Okay? Then after that, we just follow our same procedure as textual evidence. We're going to read the rest of the answers, we're going to analyze, and then we're going to eliminate, questions or answers that are clearly wrong. Let's take a look at that first. Which choice most effectively used data from the graph to complete this statement? Let's find the argument. Economists have long noted that in periods of economic downturn, fewer people can afford to purchase their own homes. So what is this saying in our argument here? They're saying that when economic downturn increases, we're going to have home ownership go down. So which of these makes sense? This one, immediately I can just tell you without looking at the graph, it doesn't make sense because when a recession occurs, when we have economic downturn, it's saying that home ownership did not change. Okay, this does not complete that statement, right, because it's trying to show a pattern. Now, this is the next one. home ownership rates fell significantly. Again, we know economic standstill, economic downturn, so it could be B. All right, let's take a look at another one. In January 4, home ownership hit its highest level. It's not really related. Okay, it's not really related. We don't know what happened in January 2004, right? The College Board is not expecting you to know what happened in January 2004. So this is not our answer. All right. Now, D, within any given year, the homeownership rate varies slightly in response to minor economic changes. Again, doesn't really relate. Doesn't really make sense that it's equally unsurprising. No, that's right. That just makes sense. But it doesn't fit in with this cycle here. What they're trying to show you here is that there's a cycle, right? That when there's downturn, people will not be able to afford their houses. Okay, and we see here in the graph that when there's downturn, people cannot afford their houses. We really didn't even need to use the graph in that question, and that's a common theme that we see at quantitative evidence questions. Always read the answer choice and figure out the description first, because you'll likely be able to eliminate a bunch of those answer choices, if not all of them, as we just did. SAT Topic 3, Central Ideas, is one of the most important skills that you're going to want to have in your back pocket for the SAT exam. There's only two questions the College Board can really ask you here. They're pretty much the same thing. Which choice best states a main idea? Which choice best states the central idea? There's 3 steps for that you're going to want to keep in mind here. So the first thing, you want to read the entire passage. Of course, you cannot know what a main idea is unless you read the entire passage and you know what the main idea of the whole passage is. As you go through, you should highlight repeated phrases or transition words that indicate that something is being supported. For example, if I had a topic sentence to start off my paragraph and then I had firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly, clearly all of those are kind of supporting what that topic sentence was. Probably that topic sentence or something similar to that is going to be the main idea of my paragraph. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to eliminate anything that's too detailed or too wordy. If it's too detailed, it's too wordy, it's probably not the answer because, of course, you cannot have a main idea that's super detailed. It's got to encompass the entire passage, not just part of it. But of course, if you've got an irrelevant answer, you got to cross that out. Let's take a look at an example question here. Many intellectual histories of Black Power movement in the 1960s and 70s rely heavily on essays and other explicitly ideological works as primary sources, a tendency that can overrepresent the perspectives of a small number of thinkers, most of whom were male. Historian Ashley D. Farmer has shown that expanding the array of primary sources to encompass more types of print material, like political cartoons, advertisements, and artwork, leads to a much better understanding of the movement and the crucial and diverse roles that Black women played in shaping it. All right, male, woman, we kind of see a little play here. Should note that down for sure. Okay, let's see if we go back through here. We've got overrepresenting, blah, 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 blah. All right, let's just kind of categorize this. Let's write a note here, overrepresent. Okay, expanding the array. We've got a list here. This is kind of like a transition word. Okay, and let's take a look at the answers here. So we're looking for a main idea. Before Farmer's research, historians had largely ignored intellectual dimensions. I take a look at this. I don't see the word, intellectual dimensions. I see intellectual histories. All right, and that kind of, even if that was related here, that would sort of deny question A, right? Deny question A because what they're saying is that there were intellectual histories that were noted here. They were just all males. Okay, now let's take another one. Farmer's methods and research have enriched historical understanding of Black Power movement and the Black woman, the female Black contribution to it. I would say this is the correct answer, but we should always make sure to check our answers. Now, why do I say this is correct? Because this entire half of the thing here, right, is telling you that she's contributing to the plethora of evidence that Black women played in supporting the Black Power movement. And this first part here is detailing what it was like before, showing that she was doing some enriching. Okay, so we see here, right, we're kind of encompassing the entire passage with this answer choice. Let's take a look at the other ones. Other historians have criticized Farmer's use of unconventional primary sources. Does not say that anywhere in here. We can just cross that out. Figures in the Black Power movement, whom historians tend to cite, would have agreed with Farmer's conclusions about women's role in the movement. We don't see any evidence of that. Does not say that. We don't know what these people would think. They're not, they're likely not alive today, and even if they are, they're not, mentioned in this paragraph at all. So we can say that D is not the answer. That leaves us with choice D. Topic 4, textual details, is likely one of the hardest parts of the SAT. And part of this is because the College Board does not give us a specific question type. We have to figure out a formula, and I've got that right here. So y is some detail, some characteristic, and that seems pretty vague. We're going to get into it a little bit more in a second, but we got this first. Let's take a look at some steps on how we can solve these types of problems. First thing we want to do is we want to skim the whole passage, especially the portions that may relate to the detail. Then we're going to match some question-related words and synonyms. So the question might have, it's going to have this detail, this characteristic, right? What are some synonyms of this characteristic that might pop up in the text? And then you want to match those, okay? The next thing you want to do is eliminate something that's general, because we're looking for a detail here. We're not looking for a central or main idea. We're looking for information on a specific part of the text. So you're going to eliminate those kinds of answer choices, and anything that's irrelevant. Then you're going to correlate the question to the text to the answer. Let's see what that means with our example question. So, until recently, astronomers speculated that Sagittarius A prime, was a mysterious object at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. It was a supermassive black hole pointing towards indirect evidence, such as the velocity of stars orbiting rapidly around the object, to support their claims. In a 2022 study that enhances our understanding of the makeup of the galactic core, astronomer Jeffrey Bauer and colleagues captured the first image of Sagittarius A region itself, observing a ring of superheated glowing gas encircling a completely dark center, which is a phenomenon only observed in the case of black holes. Why is this significant? Let's take a look. What do we see as significant? Well, enhance is probably significant. First is probably significant. Anything that's the first is, just significant. Okay, observing a ring of superheated glowing gas, that seems a little bit significant. Encircling a completely dark center, which is a phenomenon only, that's pretty significant, observed in the case of black holes. So we kind of correlated our question text here. Let's correlate to an answer. Okay. First evidence that Sagittarius A lies at the center of the Milky Way does not say that, because we already have speculation that we are at the center of, or we already know that it's at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. The speculation here is whether it's a supermassive black hole or not. This is not true. Now B, the image helps establish that the supermassive black holes are typically surrounded by rings of superheated gas. That's not true. This image, we already know that this is something that happens with supermassive black holes. Right? Now C, the image helps to establish evidence that stars rapidly orbit an object at the Milky Way's galactic center. We already know this. We already have the indirect evidence, so this is not correct. Now, the image provides the first direct evidence. This is significant. Again, we're kind of tying back, we're correlating our QTA, our question text answer here. All right, the first direct evidence, direct evidence, that Sagittarius A is a supermassive black hole. This is true, okay? We are first, we are enhancing our understanding of the makeup, but we are capturing the first images of the Sagittarius A region and proving that it has to be a black hole, because this phenomenon is only observed in the case of black holes, making our answer D. So now we're going to look at topic 5, which is transitions. So there's only really one question that the SAT is going to ask about a transition, and that question is, which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? So it's pretty simple. Basically, which of these words right here is the best word to put in a blank? So it's going to ask you a question, we'll have a blank, and you'll need to figure out which one. So how can you do that? So first thing you want to do is skim what we call a sentence sandwich, and that means you have the sentence that you're focusing on with a blank, you have the sentence before, and you have the sentence after. Okay? Then you're going to determine what the function of that transition is. What is it trying to do? Is it trying to show cause and effect? Is it trying to show like a list? Is it trying to show similarities, examples, emphases, contradictions, or opposites, right? You have to figure out which one of these it is trying to figure out. And you do not need to memorize all of these. Just try to remember one or two, and then see if you can find synonyms for those in your answer choices when you actually get a question. Okay, now that you know which of these is the correct thing, you're going to substitute a word that you know makes sense. So let's say that you're thinking of a contradiction, and you know the word but, or you know the word however. You're not really thinking about these words like nevertheless, nonetheless, that people don't really use as often. You're going to just put this in the blank as but. So just like pretend that the word is but, and then go look at the answer choices and find the word that's most similar to but. And that's your 5-step plan for figuring out what's the most logical transition. That is question type number 5. Alright, and now we are on topic 6, inferences. So the main question that the SAT will ask you for an inferences question is which choice most logically completes the text. Basically, which answer is the best answer that makes sense that you can put in a blank like this one. And there's a 3-step strategy that's extremely easy that you can follow. So the first thing is you want to skim all of the passage. Don't read every single word. Just kind of look over it and take note of which words are either details or transition words, as we covered in topic 5, and make sure if you see a topic sentence like this one, usually the first sentence, wheat and barley were the most important staple crops in most ancient river civilizations, definitely take note of that too. On your College Board Blue Book test, you'll be able to use a highlighter, and you'll be able to use multiple colors of that highlighter so you can make sure that your answers are perfectly coordinated. So now we're going to just take a look at an example question here. Alright, wheat and barley were important staple crops in most ancient river civilizations. Archaeologist Dora Fullman argues that the absence of wheat and barley deposits in the Indus River Valley, modern-day India, before 1900 BCE suggests that prior to this time, these crops were imported to, rather than grown in, the region. Historians, however, note that several millennia ago, soil and weather conditions in the area were not favorable for preserving evidence of these grains for long periods. The fact that wheat and barley do not appear in the region's archaeological record, therefore, and then we have a blank. So let's take note of what we have up here. So we already kind of highlighted our topic sentence. Now we're going to take a look at details and transition words. So our first detail here, archaeologist Dora Fullman argues that the absence of wheat and barley deposits in the Indus River Valley before 1900 BCE suggests that crops were imported rather than grown. However, it's a transition word. However, historians note that several millennia ago, so that would have been thousands of years ago, around and before this time period, soil and weather conditions in the area were not favorable for preserving evidence, right? The fact that wheat and barley do not appear, therefore, okay, what? Well, the historians here are contrasting, and we see that because of the usage of the word however. Right? Therefore, they're saying that her idea might not be true. Why? Because if soil and weather conditions couldn't preserve the evidence that there was wheat or barley, then how could archaeologist Dora Fullman know that there was wheat or barley or not? Right? So A suggests that staple grains were often imported by Indus River Valley civilizations prior to 1900 BC. No. This, therefore, is trying to prove the historians, however. A is trying to prove choice. A is trying to prove Dora Fullman's point here, right? Now B says does not eliminate the possibility that these grains were grown in the Indus River Valley before 900 BCE. I would say this is the correct answer. Remember, you should always eliminate all answers before moving on to your next question, right? But this makes sense because it's eliminating the possibility, right? Because if evidence was not preserved, then they would not know if there was wheat or barley. Now, it is difficult to explain if these crops were grown. Historians believe that it's true that soil was not favorable for preserving evidence. So it's not necessarily difficult to explain, we just don't know. So there's a possibility. Proves that pre-1900 BC staple grain deposits are not often observed in Indus River Valley archaeological sites. Well, we know this. We know that they can't really find anything because there's no way to preserve the soil, right? There's no way to preserve the evidence in the soil. We know this, but that's not related to this idea. This therefore connects to the however. Again, we're using transition words, right? And this idea here, right, is saying this. It's not mentioning this fact. This was kind of the first part of the paragraph here. And that's all you need to know for your inferences. Officially, the SAT no longer has vocabulary-specific questions, but in reality, what they've replaced them with are words and context questions. And these questions are extremely important to be able to use logic on to deduce the correct answer, so you don't have to memorize hundreds and hundreds of vocabulary words that you might never use again. So here I'm going to show you a quick strategy for how you can get these questions done. So there are multiple questions that you could be asked relating to words and context. And if you don't know There are only a couple of questions, again, that the College Board can ask you in general in the English section, and these are the ones that relate to words and context. So here we have which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase. Okay, and here we're focusing on words. All right. Now, sometimes they'll give you a couple words that really make sense, but again, there's going to be a main word. So here, for example, incongruities or deferences or preferences or independence, etc. Right? And then as used in the text, what does, and this is just going to be some vocab word. What does that most nearly mean? Okay. So what they might give you here is a word that has, a bunch of different meanings, like date, let's say. You have the fruit, you have the calendar date, you might have a romantic date, etc. What does that most nearly mean? Then I'll give synonyms for the different meanings of that word. Now here's how you're going to solve one of those. The first thing we're going to do is skim the entire passage. And you want to skim the entire passage. You can get a general idea of the connotation of the passage. So what kind of tone are we striking here? Are we informational? Are we happy? Are we joyful? Are we gloomy, etc.? Then you're going to look at restatements. Now what's a restatement? Sometimes a College Board will make a statement. Let's call it statement A. Alright. And statement A has a blank. Alright. Now we're going to have statement B. But statement B does not have that blank. It is a restatement of statement A, but without the blank. Okay? So you can find which word will correspond to this blank in statement B and statement A. Right? You can find out which word corresponds to that blank, and then you'll know the answer. Right? You just need to find a synonym for that word that corresponds to the blank in your answer choices. Alright, now you can always use context clues on our transition words from topic 5 to also help you figure that out. Now, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to eliminate some of the words. Remember, you may not know what all of the words mean, and that's okay. What you first want to do is you want to eliminate the ones that you know are wrong. Okay, that you know are wrong. Or, if that doesn't work, if you can't find an answer after that, then what you should do is eliminate ones that you think might be tonally incorrect. For example, if you want a positive word, something that has a prefix like on or dis or something like that, probably isn't as positive as you want it to be, so it's probably not the right answer. So let's take a look at this example question. The wide-ranging catalog of jazz trumpeter Miles Davis has garnered an array of opinions from jazz critics. Some argue that the obvious blank, Davis's early traditional bebop output and the highly experimental jazz rock fusion that would define the end of his career reflected a genuine change in the artist's musical preferences, while others contend that Davis's efforts across genres represented a shrewd response to changing commercial demands. So I emphasize the word changing here. Why? Because it appears twice, and because it seems like that's kind of forming our statement A, statement B here, right? So let's take a look, let's test our answer choices now. Some argue that the obvious independence of early traditional bebop output in the highly experimental jazz rock fusion work that would define the end of his career reflected a genuine change. Well, independence of doesn't really make sense. Sure, this might be independent, but that doesn't really relate to this part here. Okay? Incongruities between. If you don't know this word, let's just say we skip it for now. Okay? What it means is differences. Alright. Now, deference to. Some argue that the obvious deference to Davis's early traditional bebop and the highly experimental jazz rock fusion work that would define the end of his career reflected a genuine change. Well, deference to doesn't really make sense there. He's not deferring to anything, right? If anything, he's deferring to this because that's what he eventually switches to. Some argue that the obvious preferences for Davis's early traditional bebop and the highly experimental jazz rock fusion work that would define the end of his career reflected a genuine change. Well, preferences for doesn't really make sense either, especially because let's say if he had a preference for this, right, he wouldn't choose a switch, right? So the answer should be this one, just out of process of elimination here, right? But even if you didn't know this, see, we were able to figure that out. Now, incongruities make sense. Incongruities means a difference. It means a change, something like that, some sort of difference, right, between two things. Here, we're comparing this and we're comparing this. Okay, and we have a genuine change, another change, right? So what we're trying to look for here is a word that involves some change. And that It's how you solve a words and context. All right, topic 8, text structure and purpose. This is one of the most important skills that will show up on your SAT. Guaranteed these questions will be on there. There's only 2 question types, and I guarantee you there will at least be 1 or 2 of these questions on that exam. So question types here, we have which choice best describes the overall structure of the text. This is almost word for word on every SAT. They don't really change the structure of this question at all. Now they also have which choice best describes the function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole. Okay, this is also word for word on a lot of SATs. We're going to split this up into 2 different methods, so let's look at the method for this first question here. So the first thing is you read the answer choices, then the passage. Why is this? Because when you're looking at a problem like this, right, what you need to know is how the entire function, how every sentence essentially in the entire passage is functioning. Now, passages in the SAT can be no longer than 150 words. These ones are pretty close to that limit often. Okay. Now, once you read the passage after you're done reading the answer choices, you want to generalize each sentence. Okay. Generalize each sentence, make it like 1 or 2 word summary so you can kind of look back at the answering choices and reference them like, does this match what I'm seeing here? What am I seeing? And this might seem a little abstract, but we're going to go over an example question in a second that should make this pretty simple. Okay, then after you do that, you're going to match your 1-word descriptions to the answer choices, and that's pretty simple. Now we're also going to go over one little technicality here. If you have a question that asks for the purpose is the why. Okay, why is the author writing this? What reason does the author have of giving this to you, of giving this information to you? Why is this author including this sentence or that sentence or whatever? The structure is the how. How is the author working to convince you of something? How is the author telling their story? All right, so let's look at an example question here. Studies of consumer behavior reveal that in the minds of consumers, prices never exist in a vacuum. Okay, I'm going to go back and read the answer choices now. So which choice best describes the structure of the text? We know that it's going to be one of these problems here. It's the exact same wording. So A, it presents a study of consumer behavior, then critiques the methods used to conduct the study. B, it outlines an experiment, then it provides details. And again, you're going to see a lot of these keywords when you do one of these questions. So I'm just going to kind of underline the keywords here. So it presents a study, then it critiques the methods. It outlines an experiment, then it provides details. It introduces an argument, then describes an attempt to alter that. It states a finding, then provides an example. Let's read the passage here. Studies of consumer behavior reveal that in the minds of consumers, prices never exist in a vacuum. There is no price, no matter how low, that is always reasonable, because consumers always measure current prices versus historical ones, and against prices of other goods. We might think that 10 cents, which is a quantity of money that most of us have mindlessly lost between couch cushion sheets or on the sidewalk, is always expendable. And it is when assigned to an item that normally costs $2, like a candy bar, but charge 10 cents at checkout for a single-use plastic grocery bag, an item for which consumers are not accustomed to paying directly. And studies show that consumers are repelled, refusing the bags about half the time rather than spending their dimes. So, let me kind of characterize this in the 1-sentence method. So here, I would kind of just call this a topic sentence, right? That's like 2 words, but it's fine. So let's call this topic sentence. All right, it could also be, it's kind of like a, if you were to think of a word here, right? What it's saying is it's kind of giving a little bit of a claim or a fact or just basically a statement. Now we might think, okay, what is this sentence really doing? This is kind of providing you with an argument, I would say, right? Maybe an argument. Because it's saying that it's always expendable. We might think maybe it's not. The author is going to introduce that maybe it's not, right? And it is, maybe. So let's say this one I would say is kind of a short sentence. It's not really, it's kind of part of this one, so I'm not going to assign a new word. Okay. And then it says, but charge 10 cents at a checkout for a single-use plastic grocery bag, and studies will show that consumers are repelled. This is an example. This is pretty simple. So I'm going to go back and look at my answer choices again. Let's try to match this up. So it's not presenting a study. That's definitely not true. And it's not critiquing any methods used to conduct that study. So it's definitely not A. It's outlining experiment. No, there's no experiment that we have outlined here. Okay. There's definitely no procedure outlined. It introduces an argument. Well, maybe, but it definitely does not describe an attempt to alter those habits. We don't see that here. States a finding. States. Well, we had the word statement up here, right? I kind of said the word statement. It's a topic, it's a claim, it's a fact. That's what we're starting off with. Then it provides an example. Have that here for sure, demonstrating that finding. So we can just see it's D. And that's how you want to solve one of those problems. Now let's take a look at a different problem, right? Kind of similar. Which choice best describes the function of the underlying sentence as a whole? So the first thing you read here is you read the answer choices, then you read the sentence, okay? You just read the sentence, and then you read the surrounding sentences. So we're going back to the sentence sandwich, okay? And then we're gonna do it in one word, all right? We're gonna describe our sentence sandwiches. So each of these words is gonna have one sentence description. Our sentence sandwich is the sentence before, the underlined sentence, and the sentence after. Let's take a look at this question from the lightning rod man. The stranger still stood in the exact middle of the cottage where he had first planted himself. Okay. That's just kind of introducing it. Now we're going to take a look at our answer choices here. So which choice, blah, 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 we know what the answer, what the question's asking here. So it sets up the character description presented in the sentences that follow. It establishes a contrast with the description in the previous sentence. It elaborates on the previous sentence's description of the character. It introduces the setting that is described in the sentences that follow. So, first sentence, the stranger still stood in the exact middle of the cottage where he had first planted himself. Okay, that's kind of just like a description, I guess. His singularity impelled a closer scrutiny. A lean, gloomy figure. This is kind of short, so we're going to kind of extend our sentence sandwich, okay? Because we see that this could be a comma and this, all right, it could be some other form of linking phrases here, and that would kind of work. Hair dark and lank, mattedly streaked over his brow. His sunken pitfalls of eyes were ringed by indigo halos, and played with an innocuous sort of lightning, the gleam without the bolt. The whole man was dripping. He stood in a puddle on the bare oak floor, his strange walking stick vertically resting at his side. So let's try to characterize our sentence sandwich here. So this is a description, right? This is just a description. It's further description. This is kind of introducing that description, right? It's an introduction. It's a why. Right? What is impelling this description? Why are we having this description? Because of his singularity. In the sentence before, it's kind of just introducing us, all right? It's kind of just context. Where is he? What's he doing? Where's he at, right? So I would say immediately, this is A. This is our why. It's impelling a closer scrutiny, and it's leading to this whole rest of the passage, which is our character description. There's no contrast. He hasn't moved. He hasn't done anything. There's no description of the character really here. He's in the middle of the college. In the middle of the cottage, he's a stranger. That's pretty much it. It's not really elaborating on that. It's kind of more elaborating on his looks at this point, right? Introduce the setting. Not true. That's the first sentence. And that is how you would solve any sort of text structure and purpose question. All right, now we move on to topic 9, rhetorical synthesis. So this seems like a lot. Rhetorical synthesis sounds like a complicated topic, but it's really not. Any time they ask you a question like this, it's going to say, which choice most effectively uses info from the student's notes to accomplish the goal? Okay, and this seems a little bit weird at first because this has never been a question that was asked in the paper SAT, digital only pretty much, but it's pretty simple. So when we look at our steps here, we have read the question, then you read the answer choices, and this is important, you read the question first, okay? Because the question will give you important information, all right? In these cases, the rhetorical synthesis questions, they sound complicated. I would say objectively they are the easiest questions on the SAT. Okay, you eliminate clearly incorrect answers. This is a huge one for rhetorical synthesis because often a lot of the answers, at least 2 or 3 of them, are completely wrong. They're just completely wrong. They don't answer the question. Then, once you do that, once you eliminate questions, you're probably only left with 1 or 2 choices, okay? You're going to validate the info in the remaining answers, so you just read the passage, and that's when you actually read the passage, okay? And then you're going to choose one. Let's take a look at this example question. So, when researching a topic, a student took the following notes. There's a bunch of notes. The student wants to emphasize a similarity. What choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish that goal? This is a similarity. They're both. Both. This is not even a similarity. Okay? We can just eliminate this one straight off the box. This one says unlike. Also not a similarity. I don't have to read the passage. I don't need to know who Charles Dickens is. I don't need to know who Tom Jones is, Henry Fielding, whatever. I can already tell you that these 2 choices are wrong because there's no similarity here. Completely wrong. So now I just need to figure out which one of these is correct. So let's take a look at picaresque novels or whatever. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Doesn't matter. Okay. This one says David Copperfield is a Bildungsroman. Well, only Tom Jones seems to be a picaresque novel, so A is wrong. We know it must be B. But let's see. Both of them focus on the adventures of their title characters. Let's see. David Copperfield, the main character grows, learns, changes from experience. We're focusing on the adventures of the title character. This one's also focusing on the adventures of its title character with the main character. So we know it's B. Again, these questions are super simple. You can often eliminate quite a few answer choices right off the bat without even reading. Make sure you use the answer eliminator in Blue Book when you take the SAT to just quickly eliminate those choices and get them out of your mind. And then you just need to read the passage, just skim them. You know, it's notes, it's bulleted notes. It shouldn't be hard to skim. So once you do that, you should be all set for these types of problems. Real quick, real easy. All right, everybody, topic 10, cross-text connections is our next topic here. So question types. Based on the text, the authors of both passages would most likely agree on which statement, or how would the authors of text 1 respond to a claim from text 2, or, text 2 to text 1, etc. Okay, these are pretty simple. They're kind of like rhetorical synthesis in that you do have to do a lot of reading sometimes, but here are steps to solve those types of problems. So the first thing you're going to do, you want to skim passages. You don't necessarily need to read every word. Just make sure you get the general idea. Make sure you know which side of the argument both are on, which reasoning, what line of reasoning they have, etc. Then you're going to eliminate conflicting choices, or choices that conflict with these lines of reasoning and their point of views. Now, remember that the correct answer will extend the author's point of view. They'll extend their ideology. What does that mean? Well, in each text, there's going to be some sort of ideology that's stated, some sort of point, choice, view, opinion, whatever, right? And they're going to back that up with some sort of reasoning. But what your answer choice should do is your answer choice should kind of continue their logic, continue their line of reasoning, right? It shouldn't conflict with it. It shouldn't do anything like that. Let's take a look and just read these, okay? I'm not going to read them word for word. I'm just going to skim them, give you a second here to skim them, maybe see if you can answer the question. Okay, so let's start off with answer choice A. By pointing out that Moore would assert that external world skepticism is at odds with other beliefs that these proponents must unavoidably hold. Okay, and this is how author 1 is responding to author 2. So author 2 is saying that external world skepticism is a philosophical stance supposing that we cannot be sure of the existence of anything outside of our own minds. Okay, and G.E. Moore, who is the guy up here, is offering a proof refuting this stance. Okay, and I would say that this immediately is our answer. All right, why is this? Because Moore is asserting, right, that to think about this, right, to even think about external world skepticism, you can't be sure of anything. So to be sure of something, or to be sure of anything, you need to have your basis. You need to be sure of something to be sure of anything, right? So I would say this is A. Now, this is pretty philosophical, right? We're getting kind of deep here. But by B, okay, so by arguing that it is valid, if it is valid to assert some facts are true based on instinct, it is also valid to assert that other proofs are inadequate based on instinct. Well, this isn't really what he's offering up, okay? There's not too much on instinct here. The main choice is definitely not on instinct, and this one doesn't even really mention instinct, right? So he's not going to respond to text 2 by talking about instinct when text 2 didn't even talk about instinct. Now, choice C, by agreeing, he's not going to agree. We can just take this out right here, but with agreeing that proponents that contradict his own is fundamentally unserious, okay, that's not how somebody's going to argue. They're not going to say, oh, you're silly, right? So this is not the right answer. Now, our last choice here, by suggesting that an instinctive distaste for Moore's position is preventing external world skeptics from constructing a sufficiently rigorous refutation of Moore. Now, she's calling an obviously annoying failure, right? And they haven't found out how to refute it exactly. But I would say that this is not the answer, right? Because although they are instinctively distasteful of it, right, external world skeptics aren't explicitly mentioned here, right? External world skeptics here are here. We don't know if she's necessarily specifically an external world skeptic because it just says many philosophers, right? And this is not what this author is arguing here. Okay, this is a better answer. Maybe this could work if we didn't have A, but D is just simply not as good of an answer because of course he's going to go after the root of the issue. This goes after the root of the issue, and this basically just says, well, if you can't do it, if you can't refute me, then I'm right. Okay, they're going to try to give some more reasoning. They're going to back up their previous reasoning. They're not going to keep saying, you know, I'm right and you're not. That's not productive argument. So that means that A would be our better choice here. All right, we've got boundaries now. We're moving on to standard English. Okay, which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the convention of standard English? You're going to see this phrasing a million times on the SAT. It's guaranteed to be on there. These are just some of the things we're also going to get into form, structure, and sense, but this is boundaries. So first thing you need to know is your types of clauses. So you got two types of clauses. You should know this, right? This should be common sense. This should be common knowledge. Independent and dependent clauses. So an independent clause can stand on its own. So something like the man and the dog went to the park. All right, this part here is an independent clause. But this part here, the dependent clause, is where they played catch. If I just said where they played catch, it doesn't make sense. Okay? Like just think about it in your head. It doesn't make sense. You wouldn't say that, right? So a dependent clause is something that requires some other clause, some independent clause to kind of qualify it. So it makes sense, right? The where is now answered by to the park. Now we have to link clauses, right? We have to link our dependent and our independent clauses. And how we do that, there's quite a few ways. So the first thing is end punctuation is kind of just like a qualifier for any of this, right? You need to make sure that if you're asking a question, if your sentence asking a question, it's going to end in a question. Or if you're making a statement, it's in a period or an exclamation point, right? If you're making a command or something. Okay, that should just be common sense. You should just, have that all set. Now, coordination is our first way that we use to link independent clauses, and we need to use fanboys. What's fanboys? It's an acronym for and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. Okay. Now, we're going to use this formula here. Okay, and you should memorize these also. Independent clause plus comma plus fanboys plus another independent clause. Okay, this is how you link using the coordination skill. So you have a first independent clause, then you add a comma, a fanboys, and another independent clause. So let's say we have our first here, this is independent clause, comma, this is one of our fanboys, then another independent clause. Let's look at subordination. We're going to use to link independent clauses again, but we're going to make a clause dependent by doing a subordinating conjunction. So we have a subordinating conjunction, an independent clause, a comma, and an independent clause. Although it was raining, think about it, on its own it doesn't really make sense because you need to say something else, although what, right? It doesn't make sense. Comma, the sun was still shining, another independent clause. Lastly, we got our semicolons here we're going to use to link independent clauses again. Semicolons are the easiest one. You just have to have an independent clause, then a semicolon, your space, and then an independent clause. So ice cream was well scented, semicolon, the air smelled like chocolate. Now we have supplements, or otherwise known as elements. Okay. Essential elements are necessary for this sentence to make sense, and they don't require any separating punctuation. A non-essential element is separated from the rest of the sentence by either a comma, or two commas, a pair of dashes, or a pair of parentheses, right? And the sentence still makes sense when a non-essential element is not there. But if a sentence doesn't make sense when something is missing, it means there was an essential element. Now, if you have a non-essential element at the start of a sentence or at the end of a sentence, you just separate that using one punctuation mark. For example, a famous president, comma, Abraham Lincoln, was known for presiding over the United States during the Civil War. If it's in the middle of a sentence, you separate your non-essential element using two punctuation marks. Again, must be a pair of dashes, parentheses, or commas. So I could make this parentheses, I could make this commas. Okay? They're only going to give you one option that's correct. So this also must match this. I cannot have a dash and then like a comma. It just doesn't make sense. So Abraham Lincoln, a famous president, was known for presiding over the United States during the Civil War. Lastly, here's just a brief punctuation guide. Commas can be used to separate lists, to separate elements as we saw earlier, and to link those clauses together. Colons can only come at the end of an independent clause. They can either provide an explanation to something, or they can just, give you a colon and then you have a list after that. So you have a list. Okay, dashes are used to separate non-essential elements as we discussed, and that's pretty much all you'll need to use dashes for on the SAT. And that is some basic grammar. We are rounding off our study of topic 12, form, structure, and sense. This is just the basics of SAT grammar. This is the final topic that we're going to go over here. So let's start it off with some subject modifier placement. Subjects must be next to their modifier. So if we have a subject of a sentence, having being asked To write an essay on metaphors in Moby Dick, the white whale for which the novel is named was a topic chosen by most of the students. Students here is our subject because who's being asked? The students are being asked. Okay, so what's the answer? Well, this is our modifier. This first sentence is almost always the modifier. What's our subject? The students. I mean, students must go right next to it, must go right here, and our answer is D. Okay. Now, for our verbs and our subject-verb agreement, we're going to try to keep all of our sentence and passage. It's got to be in one tense, right? We can't have, some parts of the sentence is past tense, some parts is future, whatever, whatnot. All right, and we also need to conjugate. We can't say like they was, it's they were, or he were, right? He is or he was or whatever. All right, got to make sure that that's correct. Now let's take an example question here. Reading fiction, cooking from scratch, and spending time in his garden is some of the ways that Frank relaxes? No, that doesn't make sense. Just think about it in your brain for a lot of these verb things here. Like, does that make sense? Is that the right grammar? If you are an international student and these conjugations are a little tough for you, try looking up some sort of conjugation chart and memorize that before you go any further with your subject verb and your verb agreement. But the answer here is R. Okay. This is present tense. He's currently doing the relaxing, right? They are some of the ways that he relaxes. They aren't. They is not some of the ways that he relaxes, right? They are some of the way. Okay. And your pronoun antecedent agreement. Ensure that pronouns are accurately pluralized. Is basically what this is, right? So, though Dorothy's shoes were red in the Wizard of Oz books, it was changed to red in the movie. It is not an it. There were multiple shoes. So I would say they were changed to red in the movie because they were. It's a plural. These wases don't make sense, right? And she was makes even less sense, right? This doesn't really agree. The shoes are not a she. Okay, English is not a language where nouns are all necessarily gendered. And our last bit here, this is the last part of SAT English. We're at the end here. Plurals and possessives. So plurals require no apostrophe. Right? When you pluralize something, you don't need to add an apostrophe. Never, ever, ever add an apostrophe. Even for an abbreviation, let's say you're trying to teaching assistants, TAs, it is TAs. There is no TAs with an apostrophe. It's just TAs. Okay, you never, never add an apostrophe. All right. Now, singular possessives. Your apostrophe plus S. Okay, when you make something possessive, right? When something is the company's, okay, say like the desk is the company's, you add an apostrophe S. Okay. Plural possessive, also apostrophe S, unless it already ends in S, okay? This also applies for this rule. So let's say we have, Vice President Kamala Harris, right? Harris. When Harris has something, you just add an apostrophe. You don't necessarily add an S. Now, in some newspapers, like the New York Times style book, they still add the extra S. But conventionally, we do not need to add the extra S. This is an unusual thing that the New York Times does with their style book. AP will not recommend the same thing. Take a look at this. A boa constrictor can give birth to dozens of live young who will first develop inside they are. They are is what this says here, right? When we expand this. Mother's body protected from predators. This is a usage of the wrong there. Wrong there. Okay? It's the wrong one. All right, they are. It doesn't make sense. Just think about it. Expand the contraction if you need to. And if it still makes sense, put it down in the comments. Make sure that we know. All right, if you need more help with all the different theirs. But which choice modifies the underlined text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Our typical question. No change, no, because we know this there cannot be correct. So we can just eliminate that right off the spot. Their mother's body. Well, whose body is it? The mother has possession, all right? The mother has possession. The mother has a singular possessive, so the mother should have apostrophe S. Okay, it should not go after. That doesn't make any sense. It should be apostrophe plus S, which we see here. So the answer is D, and that is the end of SAT English.